What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Alright, what's going on, guys? We are about 2 weeks out from the Justice League movie, and of course my job is to make sure you guys are prepared for the movie itself. And so in this video, we are going to be covering the character of Steppenwolf. Now, Steppenwolf is a weird choice to choose for a villain in the Justice League film, especially a movie as high profile as this, because we've never really had a Justice League movie on this scale before. So it's kind of a weird choice to choose. I personally would have just chosen like Darkseid, but neither here nor there. Steppenwolf made his first appearance in DC Comics in New Gods issue number 7 in 1971, and he was created by Jack Kirby. Now, Jack Kirby is an interesting scenario when it comes to the character of Steppenwolf, and really when it comes to DC Comics as a whole. The whole idea about Jack Kirby and really the basis behind the New Gods goes all the way back to the relaunch of Marvel Comics to a degree. Now, the reason why I say relaunch is because one of the things that a lot of casual comic book fans don't know is that Marvel, as it existed in the 1960s, it's not the first time they popped up. Marvel goes all the way back to the 1940s, but they were called Timely Comics, and after Timely came Atlas. Jack Kirby was one of the guys who really helped to sort of pioneer Timely Comics back during the 40s, so he was not new to comic books when he first came along. But the whole idea was that, alongside Stan Lee, Jack Kirby helped to create a lot of the more prominent characters that exist in Marvel Comics. Now, the problem with this was that when it comes to the comic book industry as a whole, by and large, it's usually just writers who receive the credit. For Jack Kirby, he wasn't necessarily getting the kind of recognition that Stan Lee was getting. Because of this, I would say in 1970, Jack Kirby basically left Marvel and went to DC. And the idea was that Jack Kirby wanted to basically launch something called the Fourth World. Now, the Fourth World was a concept that Jack Kirby had been messing around with for years before he left Marvel, but it was something he never really had license to create. A lot of that was because of the fact that the characters that were coming out of Marvel were coming out super fast. The comic book industry was kind of experiencing this second renaissance. But regardless, the whole idea of Jack Kirby was to create something wholly different and wholly unique. And that's important because in Superman number 76, Batman and Superman met for the first time in DC Comics. And because it was so well received, DC created a shared universe, meaning that from that point going forward, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Barry Allen, they would start crossing over into each other's stories, which was huge. The whole idea was that in 1961, in addition to this, Barry Allen introduced the concept of the multiverse. And so with that came all these different alternate realities. But what Jack Kirby wanted to do was basically come along and say, there's all the superheroes that exist in the main DC multiverse, then there's this whole other echelon that exists way out there in the middle of nowhere. Now, the whole idea was to basically call it the Fourth World because it was isolated from all the superheroes. He did this over the course of 3 stories. The first was the Forever People, the second was Mr. Miracle, and the third was New Gods. The Forever People introduced things like the anti-life equation. Mr. Miracle focused on basically Mr. Miracle as a character. New Gods focused on all the other stuff, and that was the importance of it. The problem is that for the character of Steppenwolf, he didn't really have any major significance in that story. With the original New Gods line of comics, one of the things that was already established is that you basically had Highfather of New Genesis and Darkseid of Apocalypse. And much like Jack Kirby's themes with like Tales of Asgard and the old Thor backup stories, the whole idea of the New Gods was to be this sort of in-comic book representation of good versus evil. And so one of the things that had been established is that Highfather, over the control of the people on New Genesis, had already gone to war previously with Darkseid of Apocalypse. The caveat to this was that within the New Gods line of stories themselves, they also had a guy by the name of Yuga Khan. Now, Yuga Khan was basically the father of Darkseid, is really all it was. He was basically the god of gods, one of the most powerful beings to ever exist. The issue was that he was looking for immortality, and so Kirby wrote him out almost immediately by having him merge with something called the Source Wall, which is basically just this wall that barricades the source, kind of like this source of all life energy that exists in DC. It's sort of interesting, it's kind of strange. The whole idea is that with Yuga Khan out of the picture, what it did is it left his wife to basically run the entirety of Apocalypse on her own. But Darkseid himself basically sought to overthrow her. And so with the New Gods having gone to war previously and the war more or less having been quelled, what it did is it basically launched the story with the idea that Darkseid was trying to relaunch this war yet again. And that's where Steppenwolf came into the equation. Because of the fact that Darkseid was looking for ways to basically topple his mom as ruler of Apocalypse and then reinstigate this war against the New Genesis, what ended up happening is in an attack on New Genesis proper, Steppenwolf, under the direction of Darkseid, had killed the wife of Highfather. And what this did is it set Highfather on a collision course with Apocalypse itself. And that's the most notable thing Steppenwolf did. at least under the writing of Jack Kirby. That was one of the most notable things he did. Because of the fact that Steppenwolf was a general, and in his first appearance in issue number 7 was established as being the uncle of Darkseid, all he ever did was just what he was told. That was really about it. I mean, he was basically the field guy. In the first appearance, he was killed right off the bat by Highfather and then resurrected by Darkseid, and that was it. I mean, really wasn't a whole lot to it than that. Now, that continued really until about 1976 when Jack Kirby left DC and ended up going back over to Marvel again. Now, the rumor mill about why he left DC was just the idea that DC wasn't giving him the right kind of credit. They weren't really treating him as the guy that had helped to pioneer a lot of the things at Marvel Comics. Because of that, Kirby left, went back to Marvel, worked there for a couple of years, and then left. But the whole idea of the New Gods basically continued on this path, with Steppenwolf being this general, being sent in by Darkseid, facing off against some forces, ultimately being defeated. That really just kind of continued on until 1985 with Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, there were a few things that were introduced, when it came to the character of Steppenwolf along the way. Things like, he was basically leader of something called the Dog Squadron or the Dog Battalion or something like that. Basically like these war dogs. But at the end of the day, he was just kind of a yes man. He was more of a whipping boy. But in 1985, when DC came along and totally revamped the entirety of their landscape, the New Gods were revamped along with it. And that's when we started running into complications, because the whole idea was that with the New Gods existing outside of all space and time, outside of the multiverse itself, Crisis on Infinite Earths was designed to get rid of all that. It was designed to eliminate all those things. Not only that, because of the fact that Kirby had left and DC had decided to take all the New Gods concepts and roll them in directly to the main line of superheroes, allowing Superman and these various characters to face off against Darkseid, DC had written itself into kind of a quandary, because now they had to answer the question, if the New Gods exist outside the multiverse, but the multiverse doesn't exist anymore, then how do they justify the existence of the New Gods? Well, the answer to this question was to basically come along and say that the New Gods existed out in the universe, but that somewhere along the line, their galaxy, quote unquote, had been blockaded off, and that was really it. That's the reason why nobody could get to them, and that's the reason why they could only leave their universe through these teleportation devices called boom tubes. That was really the answer to that question. But going forward, between 1985 up until really the New 52, Steppenwolf was in the same situation yet again. Steppenwolf being in charge of the forces of Darkseid, going into battle for whatever Darkseid's scheme may happen to be, usually getting defeated, and that was really about it. There were a few things that he did here and there. In the Mr. Miracle Volume 2 series, he was a villain in that story, but again, it was by and large just kind of a character that didn't really need to be there. One of the things that was crazy though was that during the events of Final Crisis, which basically saw this massive New God story, or at least, all these major characters from Apocalypse being reborn in human form after they were obliterated in a war in heaven against New Genesis, kind of a crazy story. The link for Final Crisis is down in the description if you want to see it. Steppenwolf reappeared. Well, the problem was that he was killed right off the bat by the Terror Titans. The Terror Titans are a group that I can't really say I know a whole ton about. I know they were made in 2008. I know they were made during the events of Teen Titans number 56. They were the antithesis to the Teen Titans, as you would expect. While Final Crisis was designed to clean up a lot of plot holes and a lot of things that had existed following the events of Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis was designed to basically segue into New 52, in the sense that it was designed to basically eliminate a lot of these characters that DC had no intention to do anything with. But that's kind of ironic, because in 2011, when DC came along and totally relaunched their entire lineup, which is to say they wanted you to imagine as if they'd never published a story before, Steppenwolf returned. But the funny thing about this was that Steppenwolf actually appeared, or really, made his largest claim to fame during the New 52 in the story Earth 2. Now, when the New 52 first launched in 2011, because of the fact that Earth 2 was designed to be a reimagining of classic Earth 2, which is to say, basically all the superheroes that came from like the 1940s, more or less, in DC's publication history, while people were sort of split on it, which is to say some loved it, some didn't like it, it was designed to tell two halves, or at least one half of a major story. The first half of the story was basically Darkseid invading the main DC universe, in the sense that Darkseid was looking for the anti-life equation. Now, but the whole idea was that where Darkseid invaded the main DC universe, Steppenwolf was sent to invade Earth 2. But with Steppenwolf invading Earth 2, he was actually a lot more successful than Darkseid was. When Darkseid invaded the main DC universe, he fought the Justice League, they basically defeated him and ran him off. And that was really about it. They forced him back to Apocalypse. With Steppenwolf succeeding in defeating the superheroes of Earth 2, his actions actually saw him killing Wonder Woman and Superman. Batman succeeded in defeating Steppenwolf. He lost his life in the process, but Steppenwolf's forces were basically sent back to Apocalypse. apocalypse. Steppenwolf himself remained on Earth, and it lasted that way for about 5 years. Now, in response to the deaths of Superman and Wonder Woman on Earth 2, what we ended up getting was this sort of new age of Marvels, quote unquote, so to speak. Basically something called the World Army, which was essentially this new generation of superheroes. And that was DC going forward into this new generation of heroes on Earth 2, taking the Earth 2 concept and throwing it all the way back to the original Justice Society of America from, the 1940s in DC's publication history. And so with that in mind, Steppenwolf didn't really do anything of any major significance. He was just kind of there for a while. He was hiding underground. He was basically just sort of trying to stay hidden from Darkseid due to the fact that failure is usually punished by death when it comes to Darkseid. And then ultimately he was killed by, Earth 2's version of Bizarro. But that was it. I mean, there's really nothing out there when it comes to Steppenwolf. I mean, there is more history when it comes to like all the other new gods than Steppenwolf himself. But again, a lot of that was because he was never designed to be a major character. He was just designed to be a guy who went out and committed these acts on behalf of Darkseid. Darkseid was the major draw. Darkseid was the big bad guy. He was the big guy you fought. To give you guys some perspective in terms of what this means for the DC cinematic universe in terms of what Warner Brothers doing, if you remember the end credits scene in Avengers when you basically had that guy who was talking to Thanos, and said, well, you can't invade Earth, to do that is to court death or whatever it is, the weird guy with the crazy voice. It would be like if that was the main villain that the Avengers fought. Like that's basically it. Having said that, it's not the worst thing ever, because what this does is it takes a character that has marginal history. I mean, Steppenwolf has appeared in 150 comics in DC's publication history. 70 or 80 of those were either encyclopedia comics or comics written in other languages. So all in all, he's probably appeared in like 80 actual comic books, like comic books in general in DC. But the whole idea is that this allows Warner Brothers to take a villain who almost nobody knows about and who most comic book readers don't really care about and elevate him into somebody that people can care about. That's kind of the benefit of that. It's the Silver Surfer effect, as I like to call it. Silver Surfer first showed up in the original Galactus trilogy in Fantastic Four. He was just a silver guy on a surfboard who basically betrayed Galactus, and it led to Galactus losing. That was it. Galactus confined Silver Surfer to Earth, and his solo series picked up where he was basically a man on a planet he didn't know anything about and was learning about humanity. You got to see the world through his eyes, and the philosophical views that he held is what made him so interesting. With Steppenwolf, this provides Warner Brothers the exact same benefit. The caveat to this is that also Steppenwolf is not a pushover, right? I mean, he's a new god. So basically he has all the powers of Superman in a lot of different ways. He's super strong, enhanced durability. He's immune to like all the diseases. He's clearly like a force to be reckoned with. He's a guy that could probably give Superman a run for his money depending on how they do it. If they take the Earth 2 version of Steppenwolf, it would probably lead to him defeating Superman, assuming that Superman showed up, or it would be a very clutch battle at the end of the movie if Superman ever comes back. I imagine they're going to beef him up. They're going to make him a pretty powerful character. But again, they're basically fighting a general. That I think is really like the big game DC's shooting for. I mean, if this movie plays out the way that I think it will, the Justice League is going to struggle against Steppenwolf. They're going to have a difficult time facing him. And then probably at his defeat in the last moments of his life, assuming he dies or something like that, it'll be like, well, now you have to face my master, and he's several hundred times more powerful than I am. If you struggled against me, you have no hope against him. That's the feeling that we're probably going to have as we come out of it is, well, if they struggled against a guy like him and Darkseid is just that much more powerful, then what hope do they have against somebody like him? Which may lead to the introduction of other characters, a Green Lantern, something along those lines. But again, for Steppenwolf himself, there's not much to go on. There's very, very precious little information about him out there. He was just kind of a side character. He was a guy who was just there, did some stuff, and that was really about it. But hopefully this helped to give you guys at least some measure of understanding of who he is, as best we could anyway. But yeah, if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.